Hi there everyone, my name's Nicole and this is my colleague Teangi and we are the Aboriginal Learning Facilitators here at TMAG and welcome to our Ningina tunapri gallery. And Ningina tunapri means to give knowledge and understanding.
As Nicole just said, you can actually see this here on the wall. Now, before we get underway and before we get into the tour, we've really got to do a welcome to country and kind of, even though you're not here physically, we virtually welcome you into this space and just give you some context. So if you could just show those maps, Nicole. And we'll just come a little bit closer so we can show you these here. First Nations, but the term Aboriginal is a colonial term and something that's a label that is put upon all of these different peoples who, as you can see, live in completely different regions, so would have lived in completely different ways, spoken different languages and had different cultures. So this is a good way to describe the way things used to be. Commonly we call these Aboriginal today, but today what we're going to be calling it is First Nations. It's the more respectful term. So we're going to give you a tour in the language known as Palawakani. And if you've seen on the walls, for example, Ningina tunapri is a Palawakani word. Now, to do that welcome to country, I have to give you an explanation about the language of Palawakani. So Palawakani is a composite language. It's a recreated language. And it's made of about 3 to 4 of the old people's languages. And there were 14 that existed in Tasmania across the 9 nations. If you see the map, if you have a look down at the map here, you'll see there were 9 nations, 48 clans, and around about 12 to 14 languages there were. So this written language you can see, known as Palawakani, is a composite language, it is. And Palawa means Tasmanian Aboriginal, and Kani means speak or language, it does. So I'm going to give you a welcome in that and then translate it into English. So ready? Miladina nika, miladina muonina, miladina manamapali. Nara makara lumi, warranta makara lumi. Yapakana rachi, karadi, pulina, miladina pakana, manatu. So what I just said is this country is Muonina country. This country is our country. It has always been here and we have always been here. Hello Tasmanian Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal friends. Please be welcome to Tasmanian Aboriginal country. Now I've welcomed you here virtually and we kind of need to give you some context to this exhibition. And the first thing to touch on will be the canoe. And so Nicole's just going to lead us over to the canoe.
Now the first thing you see when you walk into our gallery is our Toilini canoe, and you can have a go at saying that. So Toilini is the Palawakani name and it literally means stringy bark canoe. About 7 people could fit on this canoe and it could also carry fire. And it makes sense that you could carry fire upon a bed of clay because you wouldn't have to relight the fire when you got to your destination.
And it's kind of, when you think about it, it's just more wise and kind of smarter to carry your fire with you. For example, canoes such as this could get you to bring the island, due to these offshore places, and you don't want to start a fire when you get there, so it's just much easier to bring your fire with you. Now, this is not the only kind of canoes that are actually made in Tasmania. There are 2 other kinds. There's the paper bark canoe, or tea tree, which is found in the northern part of the state, which is where naturally the original tea tree forests occurred. And there are also reed canoes, which would be more commonly used in the lakes and the river systems and things like that. So there were 3 canoes all up. And they do have the unique style of the 3 bundles. As you can see, we've got 3 bundles here that have been put together into a kind of canoe-like material, like a substance. And for me, this is a very, very special canoe, personally, because my father and 3 or 4 of my cousins built this canoe in 2007, and my uncle built this exhibition. So for me particularly, I have a special connection because it's an object that my father built himself. So that's my connection to this personally. And it has a personal connection to all Aboriginal people of Tasmania too, because if we come down here and have a look at the model, and we'll get a nice little shot of me and Nicole on either side of this, we will, so you can kind of see what it looks like, because it's a very special model, it is. So this was made in the 1840s, it was, when Aboriginal people were put into the prison, or the offshore processing centre, depending what you want to call it, on Flinders Island, known as Wabalena. And around about 300 Aboriginal people were taken there after the Black War of Van Diemen's Land. And about 5 model canoes were made, and this is the largest of those. And this helped us to build the large one, because through cultural revival, we took this to the hospital and we actually put this through an MRI CAT scanning machine, which scanned this little model canoe and told us the information and how to build the big one. It told us the way that things were tied in, the direction that things were twisted. It told us that there's actually sticks that run through each and every single hollow tube to help give it strength and structure. It's much like a spinal column or much like a keel, similar to a ship we see today. So this really helped us to be able to figure out and revive our own culture. And that was all happening around about 2006 and 2007. Our next section is going to be our traditional cultural island, and Nicole's going to be talking about some stone tools.
So if we make our way over here, the first stone tool I want to talk to you about is our spongylite stone tool. Spongylite, if you look at this sea sponge here, this is what this stone tool is actually made from. So if you've heard of a fossil before, that is a fossil of a sea sponge. This stone tool type can only be found in the northwest of Tasmania at a place called Rebecca Creek, where our old people used to mine this rock. We know that they traded too because this stone tool has been found all over Tasmania, so that's really significant.
It also is in varied colours. So if Nicole, if you should have a look at the zoom, so that's the same material. So from blue to like a pinky orange to a beige white, this is the same material. It is, and it's a chemical process that the different sponges have gone through under different pressures and different chemistry. But it's the same material, and it's very special, very special. And if you can recall the map we showed you before, this proves that trade concept because it's been found everywhere. It is, and it's just an amazing thing because it's, it used to be a sea sponge and it's fossilised into a stone. Now, inside here, inside this actual case, you can see an image of probably one of our best pieces of spongylite we've got, which is a beautiful kind of pink and yellow piece that we have. And there are also other kinds of stone tools of different kinds of materials. You can actually see the actual spongylite down there. It's just a zoomed up picture. There's the actual physical one there. And a really good way to think of a stone tool is to actually think of it as a tool like we have today, except it's made from stone, and it's about having specific purposes for tools. For example, this one here that I've got is a multi-tool. It's got a bladed edge here, which is very, very worn from many people touching it over many years and re-tapping it, re-sharpening it, which you could use for cutting. Here, we've got a concave scraper, which you could use for scraping clapsticks, scraping spears, those kinds of things. I scrape them straight off. This stone tool is very, very old. And the best way to explain that is, if you look at the very tip, you'll see it's actually black on the inside. So it's the same colour as that on the inside. But it's now brown on the outside, and that's called weathering. It means it's been sitting in the sun and the rain and the weather for so long that it's gone from black to brown. It's weathered and changed and altered colour. And I've even been seeing stone tools where one side it's white, and then you pick it up out of the ground and it's black. Because it's been sitting for so long, it's been bleached on one side, which is just amazing to think of the length of time and the depth of time that these objects are. I quite commonly say, if you hold a stone tool, it will be quite possibly the oldest human-made or man-made object you've ever held in your life. Because these are tens of thousands of years old, they are. And just a comparison, this one's more of a scraper. So you use that to kind of scrape a wallaby skin on the inside of a wallaby skin or to skin it. We've also got another kind, which is the one that you carry with you to make more stone tools. It is, so it's your toolkit. So you might get a hammerstone, which is a really solid kind of round stone that you use you hit a certain surface and you knock a piece off, and then that flake can be used to skin something. So this is the way of which you can do or create stone tools, and it's quite complex. And every stone tool is unique. You'll find even thumb markers, thumbprints where things have got to be held a certain way, you will, on particular stone tools, like this one here, for example, has thumb marker right there. And then if you want to hold it left-handed, right there. So they're quite amazing tools they are, and if you've ever found stone tools yourself, I say, have a look at them, pick them up, but always put them back in the space where you found them. And the reason for this is because it keeps the story alive, it keeps it on country. If you take a stone tool away from the landscape that it's in, it destroys the story that it's telling you where it came from and what it did in its journey. So that's why we always try and keep the stone tools in situ, or in the place that you found them. We'll go straight over to ochre, and then we're going to do the hut we are.
So here we have some ochre. So here we have our piece of ochre. Or Mother Earth, as we like to say, and we have a grindstone. And this is how we knock a piece off and then grind it down and cover our body like our traditional man here, Manalagana. He's covered in our ochre. And
this is it's a spiritual thing. If you think of the Aboriginal flag, think of the black. It's a duality. It represents the people, but it also represents the night sky and the stars, the sacredness of the cosmos, of space. Then the red represents the Mother Earth. It also represents the red ochre, which red ochre, scientifically speaking, this is just, if you want to think of rust of all the iron, that's what this is. This is rust of the iron ore that exists in the earth. And then all the rust leaks out to the surface, and that's what red ochre is. So quite literally, it is the blood of Mother Earth. And so when you put it on your body, you are showing your spiritual connection back to Mother Earth and that you are connected to her. You're showing you're being protected by her. And when you mix it the way the old people did, with grease and ochre, it also makes you waterproof, windproof, sunproof, insect-proof. It means that you can walk out into any environment with the grease layer mixed with the ochre, and you're not going to be affected by the wind or the rain, and you can still absorb sunlight. Now, think about the Aboriginal flag. What's in the middle? Yellow, for the father, the sun. The earth is the mother. Inside of our blood, inside our body itself, we are 70% water, as is the Mother Earth. We can find inside of us copper, iron, gold, phosphorus, nitrogen. This is science. We are physically made up of all the chemicals and all the properties of Mother Earth. So we're a physical representation of her, and that's what Aboriginal people have stated, and that's what we believe. It's both spiritual, but it's very scientific as well. And then the father, the yellow, the sun gives us photosynthesis, so it causes all the plants to grow and provide oxygen. The sun also provides vitamin D upon our skin, and the sun also, through evaporation, provides all the fresh water that exists on our planet. So if you look at the Aboriginal flag, and actually look at it through the lens of it's a story, or it's a theory of how you're meant to live in perfect balance and harmony upon your country, that's what the Aboriginal flag is. And that's why even the old people, they can prove that practice because they've got the ochre. They're showing their connection to Mother Earth. So it's spiritual, but it's also quite a scientific, literal thing, it is. And red ochre in itself is very special because you can find it as a powder, you can find it as a clay, you can find it as a hard rock like this. And in the same day, you could grind it up into a powder, mix it with water, make it into clay, put it into a fire and cook it and turn it into a rock. You can do magical, amazing things with red ochre. It can go through a full cycle in a day alone. It can go from a powder to liquid to rock form. It's quite amazing, it is. Now, and I'm going to get Nicole to talk to this one. This here is our lovely little paddy melon fur.
Our lovely little paddy melon fur, and as you can see, the fur is actually quite thick. So it would have lived probably up on the top of a mountain rather than down on a flat because its fur is so thick. And when we touch a fur, we always touch with the back of our hand because it's the most sensitive. If you ever check the temperature of water, it's always the most sensitive part. So that's how we can tell the quality of the fur. A nice stroke.
And you'll notice that Nicole's going with the grain.
Yeah, down the back.
That's right.
Rather than against.
So it's always good to switch between your palm and the back of your hand because it can give you that different sensory feeling. It can, yeah. And the reason why we wanted to show you that now is because if we look at the hut down into the entrance of the hut particularly, you can imagine that this is what will be laid on the inside. So wallaby fur, seal fur, kangaroo fur, anything like that to kind of keep it cosy. And the hut itself, because I'm going to step back into this space so you can see, would cover this circle here. So you can see this circle here, it would cover more than this space. So this is only a model in the museum, the hut is. So you've got to imagine that physically put over the whole circle that I'm standing in. And so around about 14 people could fit on average inside a hut. So imagine everybody sleeping with their feet directed into like a little mound or circle in the centre. And it's very cosy because it's actually dug 1 metre into the ground. So you actually walk underground when you walk through the entrance. And once you go underground, the temperature becomes very even. So it's kind of a cold climate people's way of living. And this is a model so it doesn't have that, but imagine if you looked in there and it went down for 1.5 metres, or even a metre to 1.5 metres, and then down inside there is laid all that fur to keep it very warm and very cosy. As well as with human body heat, a dome structure like this is going to stay warm. It's a dome, wind and rain, it's a very, very strong structure. And if you have a look at what Nicole's got in her hand now, so these are the hut depressions. And these are in places on the west coast. So this is the only thing that's left behind. It's the holes where the huts used to be built over the top. And you can see the scale in the one with the green grass, and that's about a 4 metre long pole. And it's about 1 metre missing underground. So it's showing you even after it's been filled in over 2 centuries of debris with the wind and the rain. There we go. So people ask, oh, we're Aboriginal people of Tasmania, nomads. No, we weren't nomadic. We were semi-permanent land managers, is a good way to put it, is we moved from our one village to village or one region to region as the country and the seasons changed. And so the huts and their positions were permanent. And you come around the next year and you'll fix up whatever's broken from that year and you'll do it on and on. But we're looking at places now that have had almost 2 centuries of no Aboriginal people living on that country and doing those things. And so all we can find is what's left behind, which is the hard material made from rocks or shells or holes. Anything that is soft just disappears due to history, due to weather conditions. It does. And there's one particular thing I really, really want to show you. It's this little fella right here. Because this is very contentious, and a lot of people don't know about these. But this is Aboriginal fish traps. So these are tidal fish traps. And you might have seen these if you've ever been around and walked on beaches in Tasmania. And so it's just literally like a rock wall that's very kind of naturally formed. It has a very natural shape to it. And it's designed so when the tide comes in, all the fish come in with it, and when the tide goes back out, all the fish get stuck in the pool here. And then you just walk in with your spear, or even with your hands, and you just get a few fish you do. Nice and easy. So it's a good way to manage your produce, it is, and kind of manage the food that's around near you. Nicole is going to be leading you down this way.
Now, we'll follow me down this way. We might do our timeline, Teangi.
Yes.
So here we have a timeline, and this is just going to basically talk about the length of time we're talking about in terms of our old people and how long we have been here.
So if you're sitting at home right now, you're sitting on a desk or something, you got a ruler in front of you, look at the ruler, or just make it with your fingers. Make a centimetre with your fingers. Just imagine a centimetre with your fingers, or look at the ruler. And then imagine that on this string, each centimetre on this string is 1 century or 100 years. So that means, 1 millimetre is a decade, just to help you understand how this works out. Okay then, so this red section that I'm holding up right here is 2.5 centimetres. It represents around about 250 years that European cultural society has been within Tasmania and Australia. The entire string is the length of how long Tasmanian Aboriginal people have been in Tasmania for. And that represents 40,000 years. So 1 metre is 10,000 years. So for example, if you want to see when the Ice Age finished, we'll just go back 1 metre there, 1.5 metres there. So 1.5 metres ago, 15,000 years ago, that's when the Ice Age finished. And now we go 10,000 years back, 1 metre back, and this is the Ice Age. This is the time when we could walk to Australia, when we were connected due to the water levels being different, and we could walk along to Australia. And then so when the water flooded, and that happened here, that's when Tasmania was separated and became an island. And that's when Tasmanian Aboriginal people became known as the most isolated people upon Earth. And that happened about 15,000 years ago, they did. And in the time of the Ice Age, which happened for that period, we were the most southern people on Earth at that time, very, very far south. And if we're I just want to compare the string to the one behind us, the string timeline, or the timeline we've got here, is a timeline talking more about the history since colonisation or since invasion, depending on which terminology you would like to use, which makes you more comfortable. And the true power in it, though, is the timeline string we've got here. And it separates from the words, separates from the actual physical written timeline in a way that each shell represents 1 generation. So think of like one shell is you, the shell beside that is your mother, the shell beside that is your grandmother, and on and on and on and on and on. And there's over 2,000 shells in this big string, so it represents how many generations have existed within Tasmania. It does. There we go.
Speaking of shells, might bring us on to our shell necklace making. So traditionally, shell necklaces were worn, and the King Mariner, which is probably our most prized shell, if you'd like to. So this is a King Mariner shell, and it was traditionally worn by our people, and still is the most prized shell that we look for with our shell necklace making. Teangi, would you like to give a demonstration on
Oh, yes, I love a good
how they were...
visceral demonstration. So, thank you. So imagine this here is one side of a jaw of a wallaby. That's what it is. So like that. It is. So imagine this, the other side of it, like this. So, and you might have seen this if you've ever seen a dead wallaby around or kangaroo. You break the jaw off and then you split the jaw. And then underneath their gums, underneath there, right here, is something called the eye tooth. And it's very, very sharp and quite dense. And at some time, the old people, which is a more respectful term for traditional Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the old people, used this or figured out that this could be used to pierce the shells. And so it's kind of trial and error. They must have figured out at one point that this is denser than this, and so they figured out that this is the perfect hole punch. When you hold it, it really is the perfect hole punch. It's quite perfect for it, it is. And even to the point where the little shell sits in there perfectly, it does. And this here will be strung on the sinew or the ligaments or tendons of a kangaroo or wallaby. And just here we've got a model we got made a few years ago. So it's strung on grass, but if we get this here and we flip it like this, you can actually see this is the string, and it looks like fishing line, but it's not. It's actually, that's 6 strands of ligaments out of the tail of a kangaroo, when actually a wallaby from Bruny Island, from Adventure Bay, if I remember correctly, that I strung together. And the way you do that is you pull the ligaments out of the tail, then you kind of use your mouth and you kind of hold it in your mouth, because you need it to, it's so slimy, you need to secure it. Otherwise you can't twine it. So you need to kind of anchor it in your mouth, and then you use that to twine it and make the string. And it's a specific kind of string making that's done only in Tasmania. It is. And if you kind of think about it, the best way I've shown people is to just feel your Achilles heel and think about the strings in there, or push the strings in your fingers, or the ones behind the back of your hand. And when you've shown that to a bunch of students and they start looking, you see the kids looking at their hands going, what? There's all these strings underneath my skin? It makes them realise kind of a bit of the body mechanics that goes into kangaroos as well, and how they jump and hop. And so those tail strings are very, very strong for doing necklaces and things such as that. I even made a string that's lasted 4 years. I just want to show you the change over time. If we come and have a look at this very, very close up, you'll see that that's not made with the large king mariners. So this here happens, and if you look to the left a little, you'll see that the maker, this is her name is Pilominima, but everybody at the time called her Flora. And you can see that this necklace here is actually done using the small shells. That's because there's new technology. So needles could be used, or awls, so they could start using the smaller shells. And they could start using the string as well. And you know, as an Aboriginal woman back then, I can imagine they're like, oh, what? So I can use this thing to make my job a little bit easier. It's just a form of change over time, or a form of evolution that they went through culturally at point of contact. And my grandmother was a shell necklace maker. So when I was a little boy, I can remember going out and gathering shells with her. And she's actually up here, right here. It's my granny, that is. I can remember going out and gathering shells with her when I was a little boy. And the amazing kind of process that happens, as you can see here, is this, it goes from the brown to this beautiful, like iridescent green. And that's through a special process that it's kind of been passed down. It has. And you can find green, purples, blues. It all depends on the water temperature of the shell. Like where you find that shell and what water temperature of the region it's in, that defines the colour of it. And directly behind me, and I actually want Nicole to get in there for some scale, because imagine it being around your neck. Some of these are double hung.
And some of these necklaces would have taken about 2 or 3 or 4 years even to make. And because of the new technology that was available with needles and cotton, they will be able to use more different types of shells. So you can see down here, we've got black crows, penguins, and even the really fine cat's teeth and rice shells we're able to use with the needle to puncture it. So that's change over time. New technologies means our culture's ever evolving.
And it's a really good way to talk about historical change as well, just history. If you're just looking at those 3 sets of necklaces we saw, you can see the one that was traditional, the way it used to be, the one that kind of happened right when it was point of contact, and then these here, which is more modern, these are in the last 50 years, so some of these are even made by my grandmother in this case here. So we're talking about change over time across 2 centuries of a practice. And shell necklace making, or kanalecha making, which is a string of shells, is probably the most strongest and powerful thing in our community that's kept us going today, because it's something that they've passed on from generation to generation to generation. So it's very, very kind of strong and powerful because of that reason. It means that we've kept some form of culture, and it's been passed down from generation.
So if we move over to this case here, we have our lovely bull kelp water carriers. And if you've ever seen bull kelp on the beach, you know it's quite flexible and quite leather-like. And within 2 to 3 days, it goes to a hard plastic, and if you can hear that, that's me flicking it to show the strength. So traditionally, these were our water carriers, or a drink bottle. And the largest ever recorded water carrier could carry up to, I think, 5 to 6 litres,
5 to 6 litres, yeah.
which was the equivalent to...
Well, it's 5 to 6, it was 6 quarts, which I think is about 5 litres or so, 5 and a bit litres, yeah, from memory. And it's an amazing material that you might not know, but pretty certain everybody here probably consumed it today, because there's something that we've actually exported this. This is non-traditional. We've actually exported this in Tasmania for the last 100 years as a chemical structure called alginate, or alginate, which is put into everything. It's in toothpaste, it's in ice cream. So we use it in our modern world, but Aboriginal people of Tasmania, it's an invention this year. This basket particularly is an invention that only we've created, and it's very special because when you drink water out of it, it actually gives you heaps of vitamins and minerals, but the most important one is it gives you iodine. There's large volumes of iodine that exist within bull kelp, and when you consume the water, it's leaked into the water. It has all that iodine, and it dries within 2 days, and bull kelp, the plant, it grows 10 centimetres a day. So it's a really renewable resource. If you break one, it's all good. Just make another. And that's the beauty of bull kelp. And this is a very protected species. It's one of those materials that you cannot cut off the living rock. You cannot kill a living plant of it.
You never take the live plant.
That's right. It's only allowed to be gathered if it's washed up on the beach. And it's one of those cultural practices that unfortunately quite a few people do appropriate it. It's just like the necklaces. It's one of those things that were appropriated, and we do have tens and tens of thousands of fake industry necklaces that were made in Tasmania that aren't made by Aboriginal people. So it's one of those things that does happen. There's quite a bit of cultural appropriation for sale, essentially. Yeah, it's one of those really, really unfortunate things. It is. Now, we're going to get to the mutton birds, which are a very, very special thing. But before we do that, I actually want to just touch on this briefly, because we skipped over the most, because it's time to be honest. It is. Now, a lot of people say there wasn't a written language that Aboriginal people had, but in Tasmania, and I know in other parts of Australia as well, we did have a written language, and this here is our written language. Now, unfortunately, we do not know what these mean anymore, because the people that knew this stuff were murdered, or they died in the war, and so the knowledge died with them. And so that's why we don't know what the symbols mean anymore. But they were carved into stone, and I mean like carved into slabs that weigh 2 tonne, and they were carved this deep into the rock. So it makes you wonder, they carved it for a specific purpose, maybe so people would know about it in the future. And this here is unfortunately something that this museum did. So this museum back in the 60s actually went to one of the sacred places in the northwest of Tasmania and cut a petroglyph out of the living rock. And if you ever came here as a child in the 70s or 80s or 90s even early 2000s, this was still on display up until 2005, 2006 this was. And it was on display up in what is now known as the Antarctic Exhibition, or Antarctic Gallery. And so I always say this is one of the reasons why I work within the space of TMAG, is to undo a lot of these things that the museum has done, like, stealing our cultural heritage, or even putting on display of Truganini or her skeletal remains, which is something that did occur here. So that's kind of what we're here to do, is to turn a negative into a positive. And graffiti is something that also happens. Unfortunately, we've seen chisels be taken to them, saws, all kinds of different things to graffiti and deface the petroglyphs, as they're known. Now we're going to the mutton bird, and Nicole's going to give her favourite things about a mutton bird.
My favourite thing about a mutton bird, well, surely it's to eat them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, how you explain it?
I've never been mutton birding personally, but I think Teangi can elaborate on the personal experience of mutton birding himself.
I definitely
but
can.
I do enjoy eating them, yeah.
How do you describe what a mutton bird tastes like?
Fishy lamb.
That's like the best way to describe it, I'd probably say. Like, I've cooked it for people, and they're like, I thought somebody was cooking me fish fingers and a lamb roast at the same time. And I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty good way to explain it, that is. It's
Probably hence why it's called a mutton bird, mutton meaning
that's
lamb.
right. And historically speaking, the reason why it is called a mutton bird is there's a duality here. When you look at the flesh, it is dark maroon like mutton. And secondly, when they fly so close together, they fly like a flock of sheep. They move and they bank and they look like a cloud moving together. A cloud of a small group of 10,000 or so. Because we've got to understand that there's a lot of mutton birds. There's actually 23 million mutton birds in kind of Tasmania, Victoria, and a bit of New South Wales. Out of the 23 million, 18 million mutton birds are Tasmanian. And they're an amazing species and animal because they fly from Tasmania all the way to the other end of the world, to actually the Bering Sea. When it's our winter, it's the Bering Sea summer, so they journey and do that pathway every single year. Then they come back to Tasmania, they lay their eggs, and they've actually all hatched, and the mutton bird season is happening as we speak. So the mutton bird season started on March the 27th, and goes till April the 30th, if I remember correctly. And this is actually a mutton bird that I caught personally, and I ate myself. So this is a mutton bird I caught from in cultural birding, which is at the military base known as Fort Direction at South Arm. And I caught this mutton bird. And the way to catch and dispatch a mutton bird is you do it with your bare hands. It does sound quite shocking, but you break their neck with your bare hands. And it's a very fast, quick, and it's the most humane process because, and I make sure to tell people this because there's so many myths about it. Oh, I've had so many students and even adults say, oh, you shoot mutton birds. And I'm like, oh, no, you don't. Or they say you spear mutton birds. And I'm like, that's not what happens. I've even had people say, you get a mutton bird and you spin it around until its body goes flying and you're holding its head. And it's bizarre. And I realise a big point of my job is to get rid of myth. And so that's essentially what I do here, is just tell people the honest truth of what actually happens and how it occurs. And they are delicious. And that's why we only eat the babies. Because the babies are 1,000 times more delicious than their parents, because their parents have flown from the other end of the world back to here, so they're tough and chewy. The babies have never taken off, so their meat is lovely and it's very, very delicious. And also, it's an autumn resource that gets you prepped and prepared for winter. It gets you a nice kind of layer of fat in your body to prep you, and it makes you feel really physically good. Mutton bird can be classed as a superfood, it can.
And the babies are twice the size of their parents as well, so that's more food.
Just trying to wrap your head around that, yeah. And it's mainly because mum and dad feed the baby so much food that it gets so big, it's bigger than its own parents. And that's why we eat the babies, because there's so much flesh and they're just so much more delicious they are. But the only way to describe mutton bird is delicious for those who like it. And this is something it's a bit gross, but that there is the stomach contents of the mutton bird. That's the oil, and that's the rotten fish, or the common name of what we call as a mutton bird is we call it gurry, which is like the word curry, just replace the C with the G. And so it's a gurry, that is. And so I flip it over, and I call this the mutton bird snow globe, which is just my funny little thing. And so you can see oil and water not mixing with each other. That's all that is. And it gives you the representation of what the stomach contents would have been like. And this here actually is some of that mutton bird's stomach contents. So there's a story here. The story that I killed this mutton bird and I took its energy and I consumed it. And it's a connection to country, because the way I look at it is that happens at the same time every year. So it means that 1,000 years ago, one of my ancestors would have been going to that same place, putting their hand down, catching a mutton bird, killing it and eating it and consuming its energy. That's a connection to the past. It's a connection to history. And the only thing I'm going to say is this year is pure mutton bird oil, and that's what it looks like in its purest form. It is a superfood. It is amazingly lovely. It's like the fishiest, stinkiest thing you've ever smelt. And if you eat too much mutton birds, which is something I did, you can unfortunately, it's very cool though, you can actually sweat oil out of your pores. So I unfortunately ate too many mutton birds for my body. I couldn't absorb the oil, and so your body can't handle it. So what it does is it just expels it all. And so you sweat mutton bird oil for about 3 days, and all your clothes go bright orange and smell like fish they do. And so it's just one of those very cool kind of weird things that happens with the mutton bird. Yeah, it is. And it's actually time for us to wrap up. It is.
So thanks for tuning in, everyone, and tune in next week for someone else to do a tour. And ciao, ciao.
Yeah.
Wulika.
Wulika.